Don't critique what we've done. Don't tell us how we could have done it better. Don't sit in the bleachers and be a detached spectator on this full contact sport.
The idea of circular firing squads in politics is usually associated with House Republicans, but we may never have seen anything like the circle of mutual democratic destruction taking place in New York among Mayor Eric Adams and Governor Kathy Hochul and the nominal leader of the Democratic Party, President Joe Biden.
You pledged during your campaign to keep New York City a sanctuary, a city. Do you have any concern that policy is attracting more people to the border?
No, not at all.
The issue is illegal migrants and where to put more than 100,000 of them who have poured into New York City the past 2 years.
We have no more room in the city, and we need help.
You're going to start seeing people living in tents, not just on the border, but in the streets of New York and across New York State, because we've reached a breaking point.
New York's Democrats want the migrant problem fixed because if it festers, disgusted state voters likely will elect more Republicans to the U.S. House of Representatives as they did in 2022.
We only make up 0.05 of the land mass in New York State, yet we are housing over 99% of the migrants.
Even by the standards of thought-free progressive compulsion, Joe Biden's southern border policy never made sense. What other than a crisis did they expect as millions waded across the Rio Grande?
Do you not see a connection between the surge at the border and the policy changes that Joe Biden has made in his first 2 months?
Chris, I do not.
For a time, Mayor Adams and Governor Hochul blamed Texas Governor Greg Abbott for rerouting to New York City thousands of the migrants who washed up in Texas.
If he's not going to come to the border, we're going to take the border to him.
But the Abbott excuse has faded. The New York blame game has become an internal party war.
I have sent a letter to President Biden formally requesting immediate executive action in 4 key areas. First, expedited work authorization so we can get these people out of shelters and into the jobs. Financial support for federal housing vouchers, schools, healthcare, legal services, case management, and shelter for us to provide.
It's common to say New York City is in trouble because it is a sanctuary city. But the city's bigger failing is its right to shelter law, itself the result of another historic progressive policy fiasco.
The reason there are so many people with neurobiological disorders, or NBDs, on the street now has to do with deinstitutionalization.
During the 1970s, New York was a leader in the movement to deinstitutionalize psychiatric hospitals and facilities for the mentally ill. The theory, for better or worse, was that the mentally ill should be cared for and medicated by community-based outpatient facilities.
I think it had a lot to do with it cost a lot of money to keep the hospitals open. Mm-hmm. They had tranquilizing drugs that basically kept these people out of trouble and just lethargic. And so they said, well, we'll put them on the streets and save the money by closing the hospitals.
That promise of community care went unfilled. Almost immediately, the mentally ill homeless proliferated on the streets of New York in the early 1980s. Naturally, a lawsuit followed, and naturally, a New York court ruled that the city was obliged as a right to shelter to provide temporary housing to anyone who asked for it. 40 years later, the city has been unable to house the mentally ill.
We already have an overburdened shelter system. So now we're talking about, as you stated, food, clothing, school. This is going to impact our schools because we do not turn away individuals because they're undocumented.
The Adams administration estimates that by 2025, it will spend a mind-boggling $12 billion on the migrants.
Safety is first.
And as the public retaliates, protesting against the various sites earmarked for migrant housing facilities, Democratic leaders have turned on each other. The governor blames the incumbent president.
A lot has to happen at the border.
The mayor blames the governor.
The solution is New York State and the United States.
While the Biden White House, whose migrant policy is polling at just 31% approval, buries its head in the sand.
The president has done more to secure the border and to deal with this issue of immigration than anybody else.
We may live in an era of personality-driven politics, but New York may be about to prove that even in a blue state, the tolerance for misgovernance has a limit.